afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all. We've heard a lot over the last few presentations about the drive to automation, about enabling technologies, about the move away from the human to sophisticated devices and other ways to curate content. But we're going to pull back a bit from the presentations and the enabling issues to talk here about the fundamental underlying issue of content, and one of the oldest historical starting points for content, the book, and how that's being transformed over time. So we'll talk a bit about the medium and the message, the content, and the evolutions that we might see in the years ahead. Let me, by way of introduction, get each of our panelists just to introduce who they are and say a few words about their companies, first of all. Cameron.
Hello. You have to excuse me. I had an overactive mentor session yesterday, so I may lose my voice at some point. But my name is Cameron Hunter-Bell. I have my company called Orson & Co. You won't have heard of us. We're in stealth mode at the moment, but we're creating a new digital bookstore and community around avid readers and authors, around curated content, and essentially a community of like-minded individuals all around a shared love of storytelling.
I'm Evan Ratliff. I'm the co-founder of Atavist, and Atavist is an online platform that allows anyone to create a highly designed, beautiful, long-form story, and that's everyone from individuals, photographers, writers, all the way up to the largest media companies. In fact, Irish Times here is a user of the platform. And then we also produce our own editorial product, which is called the Atavist Magazine, which is built on top of our platform, which is an award-winning journalistic endeavor in the US, which produces one very long story every month.
Okay, I'm Alan Lau, CEO and co-founder of Wattpad. Wattpad is a free app that lets people discover and share stories. Wattpad stories range from science fiction to romance stories to fan fiction and everything in between. And we have over 40 million monthly users.
So let's start by talking a bit about the whole question of distribution. You know, when people think about books, of course, the big company that always comes up is Amazon, and the whole question of the e-book. Do you think, are we talking about a big Napster moment? Is there a kind of breakdown, a disruption in the traditional ways of book distribution, or have we got beyond that debate, do you think?
Well, my view would be that certainly there's been a big disruption in the way books are published, the way the books are bought and read, but it feels to me like we've sort of reached a steady state after a few years, that basically there are people who read ebooks, there are people who love their physical books. Ebooks have, growth has started to slow significantly in the last year, so you basically have a system where you have everything for everyone, but I think in terms of how the reading experience is advancing, we're kind of at a plateau. So these very large platforms own the ebook reading experience. They're not really making that ebook reading experience any better for anyone. So I think really the design part of how books are created and the reading experience of how you consume them, I think for innovation on that front, you're going to look probably at more open platforms, things that are happening on the web, whether it's community things like Wattpad or design-focused things like what we do.
Yeah, I believe the biggest disruption is still ahead of us. We haven't seen anything yet. Because if you look at how ebook is being produced, it's very similar to the traditional publishing still. The analogy that I would use is, say 20 years ago, people were thinking, the digital encyclopedia was really disrupting Britannica. But at the end, it wasn't really the digital encyclopedias that were sold on a DVD or a CD. At the end, it was something completely different called Wikipedia that completely destroyed Britannica. So I don't think we have seen the traditional publishing industry being disrupted fully by ebook yet.
Cameron, so we talked about this plateauing. Does that mean that this kind of significant chunk of people who are still reading in paper will now remain constant, do you think?
I think there's a fallacy that this is a different person, that somehow there's a mythical vestigial user out there, this book, troglodyte book reader, if you like, from the digital perspective, and that somehow there's an entirely different, much more advanced digital reader. And I think in reality they're the same customer. They're just using different products at different times when they have different pain points. So we certainly see that a lot of the Orson & Co.'s core customers are avid paperback readers. but there's obviously an advantage to the mobile form factor that you simply can't get with paper.
So, I mean, we've talked in the past about this whole question of, the future of the book. I mean, once the author has written and published, it was sort of out there. Do you think we're going into an era where there's a lot more kind of interaction, both with the author and amongst readers themselves, that's been enabled?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing something similar to the advent of the digital camera, and there are analogies with cinema and theatre, if you like, and I think it was the device that drove the innovation, the cinema camera, but it wasn't the creator of the cinema camera that first had that. But I think so many of these conversations are dictated about that sort of the book form factor, and a conversation we were having before we came on was this sort of ghost of the paperback still haunts the digital media. And I think what's much more interesting to us at Orson & Co. is narrative storytelling isn't going to go anywhere. If you read The Lord of the Rings or you watch The Lord of the Rings, it's a very different experience. It's a different universe. The characters are different. It's entirely different. So really the question for us is, where does that deep dive, that 2-week experience where you fall in love with characters and where the detail lurks in the sort of edges of the shadows rather than being beautifully rendered by cinema, that's what we're a bit more interested about.
But give us an idea of how that evolves. You've been experimenting with the idea of online fora where people can come together, right?
So, well, some of this I have to be careful. We have some interesting new things to announce in the new year, but unfortunately we're not quite there yet. But I think getting away from just the concept even of turning pages and it having to relate to that old architecture. I think there's been some really interesting examples recently, and you were saying about innovation. I think it's coming from small independent tech houses. That's where we're seeing the really interesting stuff happening. And it's a shame that the big players really sort of hedged their bet when the market plateaued at 30% in America. And I think a lot of them really put their money into paper and said, that's where we're going to stay for the next 3 years. We're comfortable and we know how to use that product. But I think the demand for knowledge of this total user life cycle, which publishing hasn't traditionally had, and also simply the demand for new experiences on mobile devices, I think it's going to force the big players to show their hand. And I think, as Alan was saying, I think that's when we're really going to see some not only interesting things, but things done at scale and on platforms.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else like to come in?
I mean, I agree with that. I think it makes perfect sense that that the platform owners and even the giant publishers, which for the most part are large corporations, think of books as, in some sense, widgets, and they're selling those widgets over and over again. And I think what's lost in those conversations when we get sort of sucked into talking about books in the way that the platforms and the giant publishers want us to talk about them is that we lose discussions of them as literature, as experiences. And if you can imagine, like, I love reading digital books, I love reading ebooks, but if you look at your sort of ebook shelf, it's like having a shelf full of books that all look exactly the same. And when you open them up, they use exactly the same font, which is not a great font, and they have exactly the same form factor. And the idea that books are this different type of experience, I think not only is an advantage for print and why print has held on, but it's also an advantage for readers for the future, because the way books can evolve, whether you call them books or don't call them books doesn't really matter, but reading experiences can evolve to be more inclusive, they can evolve to be more visual in different ways. They can take advantage of all the digital aspects that currently ebooks don't really. I mean, they're very stagnant.
I wonder, is there any evidence that even, taking an ebook and changing the font size, something as simple as that, or adding in images or other sort of visual enhancements actually increases the completion of the read online compared to a traditional book?
Yeah, I think it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like digital replacing print. I believe if done right, digital can actually expand the market very significantly, right? If you look at other media types, after the digital transformation, using YouTube as an example, I think more people are watching video ever than before. And looking at YouTube as the movie market or the Hollywood is the wrong way to look at this. I think we should put more focus on reading and writing rather than the notion of book.
Because I suppose the other way to see this, arguably, of course, there's some great advantages of online, but certainly traditionally a lot of fiction writers, right, might have argued that the power is also in the imagination. And even when you see a novel turned into a film, it could completely disrupt the original idea of the author, let alone a lot of the perceptions of the readers who had their own mind's eye concept of it. Do you think there's a downside, or there's some need for segmentation?
I think especially in tech that's been a real issue, because you've had this sort of translation barrier between the creator, which in this case is a techie, if you like, or a coder, and let's say the parent of the piece, the author that has the vision. And I think, so many projects, it's that clarity of vision that creates a great output. And something we're very conscious of at Orson is how to create these simple workflows and working environments where you get the best out of creative and technical resource. And I think up until now, creatives have really struggled to fully communicate their vision sometimes in terms of to the techies. So I think finding new ways that enable the clarity of that vision, because ultimately it's all about the experience, isn't it? And irrespective of any format and packaging, it has to be great content. It has to have a great story.
Coming on that?
I would only add to that I think text-based storytelling has proven to be very durable and something that is become part of the human experience, and people are actually reading more now than they've ever read. Now, whether or not that's reading on their phone or reading news versus reading books, can have endless arguments on the data, but I think these are not replacements. They're not one-to-one replacements. So even as there are more visual opportunities to tell stories, I think the predictions, if you go back and look, we've been around since 2010, 2011. If you go back and look at the things people were saying then, they look ridiculous now. People were saying that their ebooks would surpass print books. Even as of 2 years ago, that would happen. So I think looking to the future, I think all of these things will continue to exist, and there are real reasons why the print book is a great technology for consuming a story, and there will also be new ones.
I think the book deserves more credit than it gets. We talk a lot about, in circles like this, about disruptive technology. Well, the book is a damn hard technology to disrupt. It's low power, high definition. You can drop it in the bath and dry it off. I don't think we're going to see the book go anywhere, I think.
Let's talk maybe a little bit about the provision of content, because of course the power of technology means you can democratize, you can cut out the intermediaries, the traditional agents and publishers and so on. A lot more people can be authors of sorts, right? But does that raise concerns about quality? What's the value of a lot of the new sort of forms of the books that are emerging as a result?
I think when you democratize a media type, whether it's video, images, or text, all of a sudden everyone is becoming a creator. And of course, the quality would vary. But if you have so much quantity out there, then I would say the chance of having really high quality content, whether it's video, images, or the written word, is actually higher, because now more people can participate. And the chance of creating the premium content is actually higher.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think beyond just the sort of, statistics of more people creating content, I think publishers have often been afraid of sort of the world of user-generated content, and I think that feels like a mistake. What we see on our platform is actually a lot of really high-quality stuff being produced, whether it's by existing institutions or individuals. But really what it creates, interestingly, for people who are in the publishing and editing world is a premium on great editing, on pushing something to the next level, so it's the level of quality that someone will pay for. And so we don't really find that the fact that everyone has the ability to create and publish means that it somehow necessarily erodes everything at the high end. What it does mean is that you have to make sure that you're actually producing something at the high end. You can't get away with producing something that's basically garbage and then passing it off as your special institutional production. So I think the one thing that it has shown is that, in our case, a very small group of people, a tiny editorial team, can compete with giant publishers. So, we've won the National Magazine Award in the United States, and we compete against the New Yorker and the New York Times Magazine, and we do that with a staff of 3 people. And so it's not really about the masses versus the institutions. It's really about what kind of quality you put into your work.
Come on.
I think you're right in that it definitely reduces the barriers to get more talent into the marketplace. I think it adds some different challenges, like secondary technologies, to ensure that users can find that across digital estates. So I think it's absolutely opened up the net to be wider. The pressure's then on us as curators and content providers to ensure that we have the structure and the systems to get that to the user, because we all know the kind of Napster effect from the old days. You can have any song you want, but which one will you ask for? Or you have to know about that title to want it. So I think it essentially creates a new set of problems to get that great story to the user.
So let's talk about one more aspect of content. A lot of my work at the Financial Times is around commissioning and showcasing best long-form journalism and articles that are from, aren't necessarily tied to the breaking news of the moment. But obviously there is a tension, and you get the sense more and more there's the kind of attention deficit. Short is what's necessary. People don't have the patience to read stuff that's long. Is there therefore a kind of future for the book as this traditional very long form of text or text plus, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's back to that point about the user and the device. I think it's horses for courses, and there's times where you want to consume short form, and that is most appealing, and there's times where you want to go on that deep journey, as we were saying, and have the benefit of that. A lot of what we do also goes about the community. So what we find is that authors often want to give these smaller pieces. Sorry, am I cracking up here? There we go. What we find is that a lot of the time these can be benefits to the user, allow the author to trial things and have different options. So we find that our authors love to have that flexibility to push out smaller pieces of media and really trial things, if you like.
I would say, from our perspective, what Cameron described before is the challenge of discovery and getting people to something that concerns us much more than attention span. I feel like a lot of people talk about the declining attention span, and it's their own anecdotal experience, and they're often huge news consumers that don't necessarily represent, like myself. Like, I don't represent the way people normally read. I'm frantically looking at the news all day because I'm a journalist. But I think there are plenty of spaces in people's lives for reading, and I think if you look at the number of books that are bought and consumed, that's still the case. It's a matter of getting in front of those people. So even if it's a smaller group, really the challenge is getting in front of those people. The challenge is not that they literally can't read a book if you hook them into a book. If you tell a great story, you can get people hooked on it. We see that in our reading times, which we find online. Like, we can calculate how long people read. So.
Yeah, people's consumption habit has definitely changed a lot in the past few years. But it's not like they stop reading, they just read very differently. And we should create a way to accommodate them, accommodate their busy schedule, and turn the content into more bite-sized digestible. So for instance, on Wattpad, most of the writers, they upload chapter by chapter. So each chapter is like 10, 15 minutes long. And when the writer uploads a chapter, we send a push notification to bring the readers back to spend 10 minutes to read a chapter. That's perfect. It fits into people's schedule. So I would foresee in the future we would see more technologies like this to accommodate people's life, adapt to their consumption habits, and I think people would continue to read and write more.
Let's just talk briefly about sustainability and monetization and how that's all evolving. Obviously, traditionally, you buy a book in the store and that's it. That's changing fundamentally now. What are the new models that might offer a sustainable future for the book, particularly digitally?
I think as we see this space being democratized, I think new business models would emerge. So far, what we have seen in the past was you pay for the content, and that's it. There was no other viable business model in the past because the cost of shipping a book was so high. But now, with the internet, the shipping cost is down to zero. Once you see cost is drastically reduced down to zero, some magic would happen. Perhaps the advertising-based model, which is Wattpad's business model, and perhaps subscription, like Spotify or YouTube Red. There were a few startups trying out different models, but they were shoehorned into the traditional publishing system, so that may not work. And that's why it wasn't working, I should say. But as we see people create content and consume content in a very different way, I believe the subscription model may work in the future.
Evan, briefly, how can you make money?
I think there are all types of options that obviously people are experimenting with, whether they're subscriptions or pay per story, obviously, the traditional book model, sponsorship. I think the one thing I would add is just that there are certain types of this work that do need a business model. So the idea that we're going to just produce the great journalism that we need by letting everyone go out and do it is not the answer. So we're trying to build up a certain business model around metered paywalls, essentially. Other people are trying other things. I think that it's important that we do remember that some of this, to produce the great literature, the great nonfiction that we produced in the past, it does need to be funded.
Mm-hmm. Cameron, very briefly.
Well, I think that's a really great point. I mean, we're a little bit different in that we work with best-selling authors and mainstream talent, if you like, to try to find those best storytelling experiences. And we're not a subscription model. We are a sort of pay-to-play, if you like. But what we're finding is about different ways to add value, not just the price. So, and that comes in terms of data, and it comes in terms of experience, and I think there's virtuous cycles within the industry that come down to more than just the final value of the product. I think that's where you need to innovate rather than necessarily on price point.
Okay, so Cameron, Alan, and Evan, many thanks. Do please thank our panel.
Thank you.